Could Florida State be next year's shock team, if you will, for the college football playoff? Why not? I was on the radio show last night in South Florida with Larry Bluestein. I'm sure many of you are familiar with him. Blues covered football since 1970. He knows the sport well. And we're just talking about teams next year. And we were both like, look, Indiana, not exactly the team that you would think would make the playoff. And even though in 2023, SMU had a pretty darn good year, did you really think they were going to make a run and possibly make the playoff? I know I didn't. Arizona State, didn't see that coming. BYU was pretty close. Iowa State was pretty close. There's all kinds of teams that could be 6-win teams one year and move up. Why not Florida State? I'm going to give my pitch on it, why it could be. And Blue is one of the, like probably the last guy to kind of put me over the top on this, because as most of you know, I'm not exactly the easiest guy to convince of something. I need to see it first, but we're talking about projection here. And just looking at the numbers and the type of players they have to run the new defense, I want to start with that. I think Florida State will have one of, if not the most improved defense in all of college football next year, and it starts up front. Number one, you get Terrence Knighton, a.k.a. Pot Roast. Coach White, that defensive front's not going to be much fun to deal with, and here's why. If you're going to run a three-man line, it all begins at nose guard, the big man in the middle. Florida State has a plethora of players that fit the scheme, and it's rare to have this because they were a four-man line. If you're switching to a three, at least part-time, they'll probably be a little bit of a combo defense, but most of the time I expect a three-man line. Your nose guard's got to be a big dude. That is an individual that must take on double teams at least occasionally. And quite honestly, if you're going to play a lot of three-man in a game, it could be over half the time. But here are just some of the guys that could play the nose guard spot based on the build these young men have. Number one, and I know that people forget about this, do not forget Darrell Jackson is back next year. Pulled his name out of the NFL draft hat and is returning to Tallahassee. New coaching staff, new system. I expect Darrell to show a lot more effort next year, and the talent is obvious. He's 6'6", give or take 330, can change directions. That's a good football player when he wants to be. Let's see what he can do. KJ Sampson, the redshirt freshman from this past season, 6'3", 305. That's a young man with an incredible amount of ability. He was a highly coveted kid out of high school in North Carolina. Florida State is fortunate to have him on the roster. Speaking of that state, Denace White, a kid they just brought in this year, redshirted 6'4", 335. They also have Daniel Lyons, who I think can play strong side in, and I think that's where he'll play, but can also play nose guard as well. He was pretty effective this year. South Florida kid, 6'4", 295. That's just the beginning of it. They've got a couple of guys from recruiting, JUCO kid, plus they got the big fella coming out of Greensboro, Georgia. Like, Florida State is about as good. This is so ironic. About as good for their roster to fit that role of the nose guard as any team in the country. It's bizarre because they were a four-man line. They've got the guys, though. That is going to be key. Number two with this, do not forget Jason Jenkins, 6'6", 280. He could play some nose guard. Kid from Tennessee. Deontay McCray, 6'4", 283. Like, they have two more guys that could at least play it, especially in pass rushing situations. I expect both to play a combo. They'll move guys around. That's what spring ball will figure out, who's going to play where. But pass rushing, they could do that. And then you also have a scenario where you can't forget about, you got those big guys and you're double teaming and really keying on them. A guy that's coming in like James Williams, the kid from Nebraska, will get more one-on-ones. Just want to bring that up. Florida State's defensive front, and I'll go into this more as we get closer to spring ball, is going to be really talented. It has the right fit. It's got proven coaches, and it's got guys that are going to try to get the NFL draft after next season. So there's motivation. This could be the most improved defense in the country, and it starts up front for the Noles. Now, I also think just overall, this is the second most important point. You can take this however you like. But Florida State had too many guys on the roster in 2024 that had too much me, whether it was NIL, whether it was not getting along with the coach, whether they didn't think they were being coached well, whatever. I'm not getting into specifics because I'm not guessing. But I know what a loaf is, and I got sick and tired of seeing it on both sides of the ball. I think that having several new guys come in from the portal, the recruiting ranks, junior college ranks, that will help Florida State immensely. And that's just number one thing here. Attitude. Indiana's attitude completely changed. They went from a team that stunk. New head coach, new staff, brought in a bunch of guys from the old school he came from. And all of a sudden, looky there. They're a team that went 11-1. Florida State has a difficult schedule to a certain degree, but it's not overwhelming. They don't play Notre Dame next year. That kind of helps. They don't have to worry about playing certain teams that, quite honestly, are elite in the Big, like they're not in the Big Ten. It's a little easier in the ACC. They could find a way to make it. Also, the quarterback situation. I lost track of how many times I talked about Florida State's quarterback this past season. For good reason. It was awful. But now we get to change that tune because Gus Malzahn's offense fits Thomas Castellanos to a T. He should have a huge year running and throwing. He was much better in terms of accuracy this past season at Boston College. He'll be a little more controlled passing, I think, moving forward. Won't put the ball in harm's way as much. And he's still a dynamic runner. He's like a tailback. Freaky athlete. Coming out of high school, some schools even recruited Thomas Castellanos as a running back. So do not forget that. Maybe the one that's a little bit underappreciated for why the Noles could make a run for the playoff next year, the secondary. If you were to say, Brian, only one position or one grouping, let's put corners and safeties together here, doesn't get a player from the portal and they could still be really, really good next year for Florida State, what would it be? It would have been a nanosecond. I'd said the secondary. They've got a lot of guys coming back. You've got multiple really good coaches that are proven. And you also have what I would like to call a balanced depth chart, meaning from freshman to senior, they've got a good group. They got guys pushing up. And one guy that I think is going to be very, very good, Quindarius Jones, kind of played a little bit towards the end of the year, a little bit more. That kid's really good. He's going to be a junior. I'm telling you, that's my breakout player next year. Has a chance to make all-conference, all-American. He's got a lot of talent. Another big corner. That's good for Florida State. And they've got a lot of other guys. They're not going to get into the whole depth chart. That'll take care of itself in the spring, but they got a ton of talent. Florida State's going to give teams some fits in the pass game next year. Finally, an amen to this. Florida State's O-line was the worst in the Power Four this year. I think most people would agree. No doubt about it. But to that end, they've gotten 4 guys already from the portal that I think are capable starters. A couple of them have a chance to possibly play in the NFL. You add that with the guys they got coming back and the other pieces they're adding from the portal, again, junior college and high school ranks. This is going to be a pretty good group. It's amazing to me. Amazing that Florida State has added this many players up front. Like this Pettis is an example of the right tackle for a moment. You don't normally get more than 1 or 2 guys like that. There are 4 that have starting experience that FSU has brought in. Tip of the cap. Could they add more? Sure. I hope they do. But even if they stopped right now, they'd be in a better spot by a mile than where they were last year. So that's important. Just a couple other teams for fun that I think could surprise next year. Kind of the same theme. ACC is not as hard as the Big Ten or SEC. That's not a secret. So the teams that I think watch out for, Texas Tech. The question is, how good is the portal class? Are they ready for prime time? And their quarterback, Baron Morton's, his injury, Baron Morton's, he hurt his shoulder towards the end of the season. That makes me nervous. I don't care if it's throwing arm or not. Shoulder injuries, you're going to get driven into the ground some. If they're going to make a run for a playoff spot next year, win the Big 12, that's my biggest question. BYU, they got a ton of teams on their schedule that they're not as good as BYU, and they don't play Arizona State or Baylor in the regular season. That's going to help them get to the Big 12 title game. Watch out for them. Louisville, running back Isaac Brown, arguably the most explosive freshman running back in the country this past season. He's out of Homestead, Florida. He is back. Quarterback Miller Moss for Southern Cal is there. Brom's a great quarterback coach. That's not a secret. And they've got a decent schedule. It's kind of interesting. They play Miami, Pitt, SMU, and Virginia Tech on the road. but they got Clemson and Kentucky at home, no Florida State. Wouldn't shock me if Louisville was a team that could make the college football playoff next season either. Thank you once again for making Locked On Seminoles your first listen each and every day. If you would, please hit that like button, that notification bell, and if you have not already, subscribe to the Locked On Seminoles podcast. I'd truly appreciate it. Everybody have a good one. I will talk to you again tomorrow.